So in this tutorial I'm going to talk about PsyToolkit. Now PsyToolkit can be used within your browser. So the first thing you want to do is start up your computer browser. Now I'm showing this here on a Linux desktop, but of course it works on a Windows or on a Macintosh desktop just as well. And the first thing you want to do is just start up your browser, and I already have opened the browser here pointed at the PsyToolkit website, which is www.psytoolkit.org. Now if you go to this website, you see the PsyToolkit logo, which is a little orange man on a green circle. That is just to make it a little bit more alive. On the left you see here a number of items where you can jump to. That includes an about section, which just says in short what PsyToolkit is about, why you should use it or why you can use it. Of course you shouldn't, but you can. There is a way to log into the system as a user. There are lessons, there is a frequently asked questions section, there is a library of experiments, of questionnaires, and so on. And today I'm going to give you a tutorial of what you can do on this website, and I'm going to say a little bit about all these different things. First, let's have a quick look at the About section. So what is PsyToolkit? Now it says it here. PsyToolkit is a free-to-use toolkit for demonstrating, programming, and running cognitive psychological experiments and surveys, including personality tests. So that's quite a lot. So in short, what you can do is you can set up a cognitive psychological experiment, such as a visual search task or an attentional blink task or whatever, and you can run that online and you can collect data online. And that is exactly what it says here. Design and run experiments or questionnaires, surveys online. And then the rest is, why it is useful and so on. I mean, we're going to talk about that. But in case you're not so familiar with these sort of things, which some of you probably are not, or you have never seen something like this, I would actually like to start with giving you a demonstration survey where you see, oh, that's actually the end product, this is what you can do with it, and then you understand it all a little bit better. Okay, so we go to that. Okay, now I show you a demonstration of what an online survey made with PsyToolkit can look like. Now, please note on the screen here we have only a browser window. I use Firefox, but this runs equally well with Google Chrome or Windows Edge or what have you. Now, very important, a survey has a unique URL. That is the line here in your address bar of your browser. When you make an online survey with PsyToolkit, you get a unique URL, and you can then send that unique URL to your participants via Facebook, Twitter, email, and what have you. Okay, so when the participant gets this URL, they see this welcome screen and can start their online survey from there. That is somewhat comparable to things such as Google Forms and so on. It's just that the PsyToolkit online survey offers things that those other services do not offer. So actually PsyToolkit is very much focused on online data collection for psychological experiments with embedded experiments. Okay, so the welcome screen always says before you begin, because people need to consent to participate. So there is some information that you can enter about this survey, so some important information that the ethics committee wants you to say, also that you yourself will tell your participants, because participants need to decide whether they want to participate. There is an option to have an unfold section where you can put the long version of the ethics committee or your IRB. I said here, and here would be all the blah blah participants usually don't read, but which IRBs want you to put in. That's quite handy actually, because what we noticed is that IRBs and ethics committees, as they are called in the United Kingdom, often ask to present participants with a lot of information which participants do not necessarily want to read, or which they don't find that relevant. It's similar to all the information you get when you buy a new phone contract, and there's all this small print, so you can hide that away a little bit. Then there's a section for contact information. Let's say this study is carried out by Homer at the University of Springfield. You can give a contact email. You can also, and this is very useful, you can give some technical requirements for your computer. In this case, we say here, for this study you need to have a real keyboard, because there is an embedded experiment and people need to press keys on the keyboard, so this would not work on a mobile device. You could make a survey for a mobile device, but this specific one doesn't work on a mobile device, and so we want to let participants know about this. And then here's the start button, and at the bottom there's also some data protection information. I'm not going into that, but you get the point. So if I click the start button, then you get your questions. In this specific demonstration survey, I put in a question about age. I mean, that's one of those demographic questions that you often want to ask. So I just put in a random age, and then once I've selected that here with this slider element, I can click the continue button, and then PsyToolkit has processed that, and now our embedded experiment starts. You see here a big red rectangle and click to start. So if I click that, the screen goes full screen. That's quite nice for for experiments with visual elements. There's no distraction from clocks or counters and so on. You can have some instructions here. This is just for demonstration purpose, so it's not, you don't really need to understand this, but I have made a short instruction screen saying demonstration of the famous Simon task. In this task you need to respond to red and green stimuli. If you see a green arrow, you must press the L key. If you see a red arrow, you must press the A key. You need to press within 5 seconds. There are 20 trials. Now let's start that. I press the space bar, as it says here, to start, and there we go. So I press the L key, I press the A key, I press the A key, I press the A key. Oh, that is wrong. I did that intentionally just to show you. You can have feedback to participants if they press the wrong key. Like there's a scripting language that you can create such experiments with, and I'm going to show you that. I'm going to finish off this, and then done. You can present feedback to your participants. In this case, your average response speed in the correct trials was 1040 milliseconds. And then you can have like a thank you message. And then we're out of the embedded experiment and back to the standard survey. You can then have some more questions. In real surveys you might have some questions about people's personality or their attitudes or whatever you need. In this case I just have an example question. What sport did you do today? Let's say I didn't do any, and then I click this button, and then there's feedback action, and this is just to show you that PsyToolkit surveys, they can very easily use previously given answers or can access the response times of embedded experiments. So in this case, this feedback question knows about the average response time, knows about the answer given before. I don't know if that is so easy to do in surveys like Google Forms. In PsyToolkit this is very easy because it's often needed in these sort of like psychological surveys. And once we have done this, once we have read this feedback, click to continue, and this is the final item of this demonstration survey. It says here, thank you for your participation. Write down the code before later reference. Now all this stuff is actually, I just wrote this as my survey. You can customize this. You don't even need this sort of like unique identifier at the end, but sometimes that's handy. So there's an option to give each participant a unique identifier, because sometimes that's useful if participants later want to take part in a second session and need an identifier for that. So you can give that in the first session, or you can give them an identifier to give them the opportunity to withdraw their data. Then they can give you this unique identifier and say, well, please remove those data files. Sometimes this is useful. I'm just showing this here to show you what's possible. And then, okay, that's the end. So what I've done so far is I've shown you what an online survey with an embedded experiment can look like in PsyToolkit. It's relatively easy to create. It takes something like 15 minutes to set up a simple survey like this. It can run in any browser. And in the next section of this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to set up such surveys yourself. Now I'm going to tell you how you can make your own online survey and how you can create your own embedded experiments. Now let's go back to the PsyToolkit website, just to the main website. Before I told you that you can find all the basic items that you can read about here. Before we go to the login system, where you can set up your own account and create your own survey, I just should point out that, of course, before you can use that, you need to know a little bit about how the system works. And for that, I should say there are all sorts of lessons. This is also really nice if you use this system in teaching. It is made so that students can really learn everything from the website. So not only about how to create a survey or an embedded experiment, but also, you know, sort of like the key concepts of psychological experiments. You know, what is a stimulus? You know, what is a trial, and so on. Now, if you already know those things, I'm just going to click to lessons for use with PsyToolkit. There are some really important lessons. How to set up a PsyToolkit study. This is an in-depth lesson about working with PsyToolkit, and it has actually video tutorials. I also tell you a little bit about how much time it costs to learn to work with PsyToolkit. So I say, for example, understanding the basics of PsyToolkit would probably take you 1 hour, especially if you do it through self-study. Learning how to set up a questionnaire study, well, it takes you, if you already know a little bit about this, you know, you can learn it quite quickly. But if you're new to it, it might take you 5 hours. Learning how to set up a reaction time experiment might take you between 2 and 10 hours. And so on. So this is quite handy. I mean, of course, whenever you start working with a new system, you need to accept that it takes time to learn the basics. And today's tutorial just basically gives you an introduction, but I cannot teach you all the details because PsyToolkit is such a big system with so many different features and options that it's impossible to even teach you know, like relatively simple things. But the good thing is that it is easy to learn. There are thousands of students around the world who use this just by learning from the website. So that's important to know. Also, what is quite easy, I think it's nice to learn from examples. So there is a library of experiments, and you can click on that. And if you go there, it says there are over 25 experiments. If I browse down, you can see that there are experiments such as the visual search experiment or the mental rotation task or whatever. And you can click on them and you can see what they would look like. So let's do that, for example, for the visual search task. You can, I'm not going into the details here, but you can do all these tasks, and you see what they do. I'm just clicking some buttons here. I'm going back, and then you can also see how it is coded. So you can download the PsyToolkit script and use this experiment in your own user account. So all these, so if you want to learn from examples, that's often a quick way to learn. The same is true for questionnaires. Questionnaires have their own scripting language. There are over 90 existing psychological scales to measure things such as personality profiles, mental health issues, and so on. You can combine those with experiments. You can copy and paste these scales. They're all free to use, and you can use them in your own surveys. And that's often, I see, what students do. Right, okay. But what I want to do now actually is I want to go to the main homepage again of the PsyToolkit website, and I want to go to creating your own user account so that you can set up your own surveys. So you go to web-based login and you click here, and then it asks you for a login, which is always your email and a password. If you don't have that set up yet, you need to register a new account. If you click on register new account, it's very simple. You need to enter your email, your name, some questions about you. I always like to know where people are from. You fill it in, and then you get your password sent into your email. Okay, so and next we are going to look in more detail about what happens once you have logged in and when you're in the system to set up your own surveys and experiments. So this is the system that you see once you have logged into your own account. Note that what we see here is as follows. You see your own name so that you know you've logged in. It says here PsyToolkit on the web. It says what the current version is. Versions change every 2 to 3 months. The software is always upgraded to a better version. There is an information line here. Please like it via Facebook. There is a did you know item. Okay, so and there's a whole lot of things that you can do here. So you can change, for example, your settings. Let's quickly go there. You can change your name. You can even upload a picture if you wish to do so. You can change your password and so on. You can also at any time delete your account, so you're not forced to keep using this system. It is non-commercial, so you can do that if you want. Let's go back to the menu here on the left. So what you basically see here is some general things that you can use. You can create experiments, surveys. You can get experiments from the library. You can also share experiments with other users. That's very useful. But right now I'm going to show you how to create a new and very simple experiment. So I'm going to click Create New Experiment. If you do that, there's some information here. I'm going to choose method 1, completely new experiment, and I'm going to call this, for example, my experiment. And I click the button, and then I get here an empty white box with a line here, enter code. Now basically PsyToolkit experiments, they are basically scripts, and these scripts are a little bit like a simple programming language. And I'm going to show you a simple script, okay, for that shows a rectangle on the screen and requires a button press from the participant. So in each PsyToolkit script, you always have tasks, and tasks basically tell the computer what to do in one trial. So I call this task, well, let's call it my trial. And first of all, I tell the computer that I want to use the keyboard and that I expect participants to now and then press the space bar. So I can say the keys that to be used. In this case, it's only one key that I use is the space bar. Then I'm going to say, okay, show a rectangle. Show rectangle. Now, of course, if I just say show rectangle, the computer wouldn't know how big it is, what color it is, and where it should be shown. So I need to first give the computer some XY coordinates. In this case, I do use 0, 0, which in PsyToolkit is the center of the screen. And then I can provide the width and height of the rectangle. I'm going to make it 100 pixels wide and high. And then I can provide the color using 3 numbers, the red, green and blue channel, as is very common in computer languages. I make a rectangle that would be 255, 0, 0. Now why 255? 255 is always the maximum value for a color channel in computers. That is just traditionally the way it's set up. So it means in this case maximum red, no green and no blue, and that just gives you a red rectangle. We will show that see that in a second. Now I'm going to tell the computer to wait for a key press from the participant. So I say read key. So basically read keyboard. Well, which key? Well, I'm saying read the one key that we use in this task. There is only one, so the space bar. And then you can say how long to wait for that. In this case, I say let's wait maximally 5 seconds or 5,000 milliseconds. If the participants has not pressed a button by then, just go on. Okay. Then after the participants has pressed the button, I'm going to remove that rectangle from the screen. So how do I do that? Well, there is a command called clear. Now clear what? You need to say which stimulus, and in this case it's the first stimulus that has been shown. So you just say clear 1. And that's basically it. The final thing that I want to do is I want to save the response time to a data file. So I say save RT, and that will actually create a data file, and for each time the trial is being used, the response time is being saved. And that is it. So here you have a very simple task. It takes only 5 lines. Now in reality, most tasks are far more complex because you will give feedback to participants if they make mistakes and so on. But here the idea is to show you just simply what a script is in PsyToolkit. Now trials, of course, task trials, they are called multiple times in a block. So we always have at least one block. Let's call the block test. And then you say task list, which tasks are used in this block. In this case we only have one, of course. It's called my trial, and I want to have 3 of those trials, and then I end my task list, and that's it. This is the whole script. For setting up a simple PsyToolkit experiment. Now of course it's very basic, very simple. You could in principle upload images if you want to show image stimuli. Now we save the code, and the computer has saved it, and you see now here on the left my experiment. If I click on that, you see this code, so it is stored. You can also delete it if you want, but of course we don't want to delete it, we actually want to run it. Now in order to run it, you first need to compile it. So you click this to make your code into a runnable experiment. Compile takes only a few seconds. It was successful. That means the the script is correctly programmed. If there would be a mistake, you would get feedback here on how to improve your code, but in this case we can now run the experiment. So that is basically setting up an experiment, and next let's try to run this. Now of course this is always a very exciting moment, so I'm going to click run experiment, and then you see this like you've seen before. You click this and yes, there is my red rectangle. Great. I press the spacebar and I see the spacebar does actually not disappear between the trials, and that is a little bit funny. So I can go back to the experiment editor and then look at my script and see why is that. Well, actually between the clearing the stimulus from the screen and the next trial was no time, so I'm going to introduce a short delay of say half a second there, or 500 milliseconds. I'm going to save that, I'm going to compile it again, and I'm running it again, and I'm going to see whether that improved it. And yes, okay, now I press the spacebar and then it takes the red rectangle shortly from the screen, and that's it. And that works very well. Okay, I can even show the data. Then I show these 3 response times for each of the trials. And I'm going to back to the experiment editor, and I'm, of course, as I said, I mean, you can do things such as sharing this with another person. So if I want to share this with my teacher, if I'm a student, or with my student when I'm a teacher, or with my friends or whoever, you can also say I'm going to share this, and then you can say some email at email.com, and then you can share it with a person. Now we're not doing this for real, of course, but just shows you what you can do. Now just an experiment is not that useful. Ultimately you want to collect online data, and in order to be able to do that you need to embed this experiment in a survey. And the next thing that I'm going to show you is how to create a survey in which experiment is embedded. Okay, so far I've shown you how to set up an experiment, and so we have now my experiment here in the list of experiments. Now we want to create an online survey which has that experiment embedded in it, so that you can ask participants to participate. The experiments on themselves, they cannot be used directly by participants on the internet. You always need to embed an experiment in a survey. And of course that makes sense, because apart from the experiment itself, you always want to give some other information like the welcome screen, you want to get some demographic information and so on. And you couldn't do that just with an experiment. You need to embed it in a survey. The survey, so to speak, gives the wider context that is needed for an experiment. Now, let's first create a new survey. So we go to create here in the left menu, and we go to create new survey. Now there's some information. I'm going just to method 1, completely new survey. I'm going to choose a name, and I'm going to call it simple survey. And I click the create button, and then there we are. We see now in the left menu it has been created. Here, left survey, and here we see some code, and I'm going to quickly explain that to you. It's important to understand that, like the experiments, the PsyToolkit surveys, they are based on a scripting language. The scripting language of surveys is different from the scripting language for experiments. The scripting language for surveys is very basic and very simple to understand. But for new users, I actually encourage them to use the easy mode, which is an interactive way to create the same script. And I'm going to use that. But nonetheless, I quickly want to explain to you what is in such a script. So what you see here basically are lines, and a set of lines constitutes one question. and different questions are separated by an empty line. Now the first question, for example, has a label. So it says L colon, that means label. Example question 1, T colon, that's the type of question, is a radio question. That is basically a question in which you can choose one item out of multiple items. You have Q colon, that's the question that participants see. Which of the following foods do you like best? And then the participant sees 4 options: rice, noodles, bread, and potatoes, and needs to choose one of them. Now that is a way to describe the questions. As I said, let's go to the easy mode. In the easy mode, which is experimental in the latest version of PsyToolkit, so there's a warning that it's experimental. Ignore that for now. Here in this table you see that there are 2 questions, example question 1, example question 2. Gives you some basic information, and if you click on them, you can edit them. Now actually, we don't want any of these example questions because this is a new survey. So I'm going to back to the standard survey editor, and I'm going to delete all this code so that I just have an empty box. I'm going to save that, and that's what I'm going to start with, because I'm going to create a new survey. The reason why these 2 example questions are always in new surveys is just to give participants a starting point. That's just how it is. Okay. If we click easy mode now, there are no questions, and I'm going to add a new question. Now I'm going to want to know how old people are, so I'm going to here you see all the different question types that there are in surveys with a short description and a link to the help. I'm going to take a range question, that is a slider scale like you have seen before. So if I click this, I need to first give an identifier. It comes up with one. I can give it a different name. I can call it age, and I say, okay, how old are you? And then then there's some information for you. There is basically one line, one slider. I can have multiple sliders, but I want to have one. Within curly brackets, you can give options to the slider. For example, a minimum value, a maximum value, a label on the left of the slider, a label on the right of the slider, a starting point. Now that's just for example, so we don't want to use those. And for the minimum value and maximum value, we're going to give the age of our expected participants, which will be between, say, 18 and 99 years old. And then we're just saving the question. And then the nice thing is, you can, in this easy mode, you can even have a preview. So it will look like this: how old are you? And then you can choose anything. Now in the preview, of course this doesn't really work yet, but it shows you what it will look like to participants. I can close this tab, and now I'm going back to the easy mode overview of all questions. And if you see, look here, you see I have created one question. The label is age, it's a range type, and it says how old are you. Now just to go back to the standard survey editor, if I would have looked at the standard survey editor, it would just look a little bit different. So if you are an experienced coder, you might find it quicker to code the language using this scripting language, but if you are a new coder, you might just use the easy mode. So I'm going to add one more question, namely the embedded experiment. So I'm going to click the plus here to say that I want to add a question. I'm going to choose the experiment type. Click that. I'm calling that, say, my experiment. I just can choose anything. I don't need a main text for that. There is only one, well, there are multiple experiments to choose from. I use my experiment, actually, that I also had called the same there. I save it, and then my survey is finished. So I'm going back to the standard survey editor. And there we are. So we have created a very simple online survey. And now we go down to compile it into runnable code. The great thing is that the survey was compiled successfully. Again, I mean, if there are syntax errors, mistakes in your code, the computer will tell you. Now, that's not all. I mean, in order to have a survey, you need to have a welcome screen and you need to write some text for that. There are all sorts of options. So you can say, this is my survey, please participate. Now I'm not going to type all these things in here because that might take you well, if you do it very quick, might take you 5 minutes, but more typically, if you think about it carefully, it might take you some more time, depending on the complexity of your study. You can enter all this stuff like contact information, all sorts of information that you want to give to your participants. For example, before I showed you that you can give people a unique identifier at the end of the experiment. There is an option to choose that, whether you want it or not. The URL that they go to once they've finished the survey, whether there are specific technical requirements. And then you save that. Once you've saved that all, you can recompile it. But what we also should do is actually we should make the survey online accessible, and that's quite important. That's in survey status. By default, it's not yet online accessible. So first you need to compile it. Once it has compiled successfully, you can make it online. So we click this tick box here. We say the study is being designed, and then say change survey status. And this is quite important. Then you get a URL, and you can give this URL to participants in in whatever way you find useful. You can send this URL via email. You can make a Facebook post or a Twitter tweet or an Instagram, whatever you have. I don't keep track of these things, but you can use that all. You can also try it yourself. So this is what it will look like. This is what we just have typed. So it's very short. Normally you should have much more information. Like there's our question, how old are you? And here's our embedded experiment that we just created. So that works all fine. So there we are. We have created in a very short time an online survey with an embedded experiment. And what you want as a user of PsyToolkit is, of course, use this in a more sophisticated way to make complex experiments and complex surveys. Now, the easiest way to do that, especially when you're learning, is to copy and paste code from the survey library or from the experiment library. One of the nice things of having these surveys in just text mode is that you can copy and paste from the survey library examples. Many users actually do that. So I hope that this gave you a good idea of the basic setup of an online survey with an embedded experiment. I should say there are many other complex features. Some people combine this with MTurk. MTurk is useful because it gives you the opportunity to get participants and that you can pay them. There are ways for PsyToolkit to interact with external websites via this exchange of variables. And in the future, I would like to write more documentation on how to exactly do that. Currently, such documentation is not available, so if you want to do it, you need to figure it out yourself. And hopefully this year I can write better documentation on that topic. Now, of course, once you're done with programming, I recommend you always to log out, and then you're encouraged to make a donation to PsyToolkit. It should be noted again that PsyToolkit is a non-commercial project. that actually costs money to run. So for example, the PsyToolkit server is in a professional data center, costs money to run. So the whole project is paid by users. People can make small or large donations, and that keeps the project running. I hope you like PsyToolkit. The nice thing also is that it is freely accessible, so you can try it out yourself, see whether it works for you. If it does, great. If it does not work for you, no problem. You have not spent any money on it. You just have looked at it. I should say the system is used by people around the world. It is growing in popularity, probably because of the ease of use and the fact that it doesn't cost money. This is particularly useful for students who do not need to work on university campus in an environment where they have the license for the software and so on. Anyone can just use this from home. All you need is a browser and the internet. And now for the people in Florida, I'm here to answer questions. And if you have watched this online as as a potential user of PsyToolkit, if you have any questions, just drop me an email. Thank you.